50 years since Biafra, a new separatist movement is making its voice heard in Nigeria. We'll examine the legacy of that conflict and ask why Africa has such a grim history of civil war. I'm Shuli Ghosh, and this is Insight. Hello and welcome to the programme. 50 years ago, the leaders of a predominantly Christian tribe in southern Nigeria declared the creation of their own republic, Biafra. 3 years later, and at the cost of 1 million lives, the rebellion was over. But for some, the dream of separation has never died. Insight's Juliana Oleinka reports.
These children are orphans. Their mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles and siblings are among the almost 3 million Biafrans who were killed during the Nigerian Civil War. Known as the Biafran War, the brutal battle was fought by Nigerians to reclaim the succession of Biafra, an area in the south of the country, home to many small ethnic groups, but populated predominantly by the Christian Igbos.
The Biafran Air Force, small as it is, has stopped the entire oil flow of Nigeria from the mainland world.
You think you can limit force once you use it?
I've told, in fact, my troops that they are not fighting a total war against an outside enemy. They are only taking police action to crush a rebellion.
The war was a culmination of political, economic, cultural and religious tensions, which preceded Britain's formal decolonisation of Nigeria in the early 1960s.
In the north, of what became the northern Nigeria, there were people who were devout Muslims. They had their own way of life. They had their languages, they had their cultures. In the west, you had the Yoruba people who had, again, similar views. Part of them were Yoruba, part of them were Muslim, part of them became Christians. They were the first group in Nigeria to be exposed to westernization. Whereas in the eastern part, which we call Biafra, were also exposed to what we call this mission exposure by the British. And they also became, if you like, because they had Judeo-Christian values, it was easier for them to take on the Christianity and run with it. So you had 3 different major ethnic groupings that constituted what we call the Niger area, which became Nigeria.
The Igbo people, one of the largest ethnic groups in sub-Saharan Africa, developed a strong ethnic identity during Britain's colonial rule. Many of them became enthusiastic in their embrace of Christianity and Western education. The skills the tribe acquired to develop Nigeria led to a series of ethnic clashes.
They felt they'd been rejected because they had to set up and build Nigeria. Now, in order to protect themselves, they said, since you no longer want us in Nigeria, because no part of Nigeria was actually safe for them, be it in the north, be it in the west, it was like a gang up. Because they were successful in most things, people felt they were rejected.
After 2.5 years of war, Biafran forces surrendered to the Nigerian federal military government and Biafra was reintegrated into Nigeria. 2017 marks 50 years since Biafra succeeded. A revival in secessionist sentiment in southeastern Nigeria threatens to undermine President Muhammadu Buhari's vision of a united Nigeria. With terror group Boko Haram waging war in the north and Niger Delta militants attempting to destroy oil production in the south, authorities have warned that anyone sowing discontent or inciting public disorder will be dealt with firmly. There have been accusations from human rights groups that peaceful Biafra activists are being unfairly targeted. There is a feeling among the Igbo community that they are still being marginalized from the rest of the country.
We, the indigenous people of Biafra, the present generation of Biafrans, are saying that it cannot continue and justice must be done. It doesn't matter how long it takes. In the end, Biafra will be restored.
In many ways, the government has been applauded for its attempts to reconcile its various tribes under immense opposition. However, 50 years on, the legacy of Biafra is still palpable throughout the streets of Nigeria. Juliana Olainka, reporting for Insight.
Well, let's discuss this further. I'm joined in the studio by Biafra Iam, who is an international news reporter at International Business Times UK, covering Africa and the Middle East. And also with us is Philip Iam, who is the UK chairman for the ruling political party in Nigeria, the All Progressive Congress. Good to have both of you here. So this was clearly a very dark time in Nigeria's history. Philip, as a Nigerian, what does it mean to you?
Well, I mean, I think that let's look at where we are at as a country. I think we've moved a long way since the Biafra War 50 years ago. I think that also we have to understand that, yes, a number of persons still, feel aggrieved and pained by the outcome of the Biafra War. It is the fact that for any war, for the scars to heal, it takes a lifetime. It takes a very long time for the scars of any kind of war to heal. The First and Second World War are still being discussed. So I think that 50 years, yes, a long time, but in the history of the healing processes that are involved in post-war, it's still a short time. And I think that Nigeria has done tremendously well.
It may be a short time, relatively, but are the underlying causes of the Biafran War being addressed?
That is a very key and critical question. If I may answer, I would say no. I would say no because the intensity and scope of the issues that led to the Biafran War, they are still there. And I think that Nigeria needs a bold and strong nationalistic leadership to deal with those challenges.
Do you agree with that, Ludovica? Because clearly there are still issues there. We've seen the Igbo secessionist movements beginning to grow again in Nigeria.
Yes, I definitely agree with Philip. There are underlying causes that have not been addressed yet. And when I happen to talk with activists or members of these secessionist groups, what they claim is that, you know, they still feel disenfranchised, they don't feel part of Nigeria, they feel ignored by the federal government. And what they say is that they don't have access to education, they don't have proper infrastructure, they don't have jobs.
In fact, President Buhari himself has been accused of following policies that marginalise Igbo.
Yes, and this is what people, you know, who call for a breakaway of the so-called Biafran territories are claiming as well. So I think, as Philip said, the government needs to address the underlying causes, the grievances, or needs to engage in a sort of dialogue, because what it seems to be happening at the moment is that, yes, the government is aware of the protest, of this ongoing sentiment, but it hasn't done much.
And one of the many grievances is that no one has been held to account for that deliberate policy 50 years ago of denying food and medicine getting into southern Nigeria. So we saw those terrible, terrible pictures of starvation. So many people feel that justice hasn't been done.
Well, first let me say this. I am from the south part of Nigeria, so I'm not Igbo, but we are quite close. We are close enough to them, you know, in terms of proximity. I would like to answer this question two ways. First, it's infrastructural development. Now, this government led by President Buhari has made tremendous impact already within 2 years in terms of infrastructural development compared to all the other governments we've had in the past in the southeast. No doubt about that. Talk about rail transport, talk about road construction, talk about the second Niger bridge that has been there for years. All of these have been actively, you know, constructed. So infrastructure-wise, yes, a lot is going on under this government. Now, in terms of interfacing with the people, sitting down to discuss and look at the key problems. Why was there a war in the first instance? This is where I think that the leadership, both of the Igbo and on the Nigerian side, continue to fail. There is a need to sit down and interrogate why was there a war in the first instance.
But doesn't it come down to the fact that the peoples and the tribes in the south feel culturally disconnected from the north? Their heritage is different, their origins are different. That's one of the key issues, isn't it?
I think so, but I think that the moment when key grievances are addressed, people might feel also more willing to feel Nigerians as part of a whole country. I think so. So, I mean, I think a dialogue is needed.
So, but what do we need to see? I mean, Philip is saying that, you know, that there have been improvements, there have been great strides, but it takes strong and bold government changes to make a difference. So what do we need to see in Nigeria?
I think, first of all, there needs to be clarity in terms of what happens when the so-called pro-Biafra activists take to the streets and protest, because there have been rights groups claiming that unarmed protesters have been killed, and then on the other side you have security forces constantly denying these claims. So there needs to be clarity on this. There needs to be reports, like better insightful reports on what happens on the ground, and people need to start taking responsibility for their actions. On one side, this is, I think, it would be the first step, because we've seen the pro-Biafra movement regaining momentum following the arrest of Nnamdi Kanu, and things seems to have escalated in the past 2 years, and the killings and the fact that people have been allegedly killed by security forces further increased grievances. So I think that would be the first step.
So, Philip, what do you think are the prospects for Nigeria, the issue of Biafra? You know, what can southern indigenous people hope for in Nigeria?
My personal feeling and views are this, that Nigeria has a great future. Or A. B, I don't see Nigeria of 2017, you know, with the possibility of breakup. All right. But I also think that there is the need to sit down and look at the issues. One. Two, there is the need, you asked the question about people being held to account. Being held to account does not necessarily mean being punished. There is a need to simply say, I am sorry, you know, from both sides. I don't think that the fault, at least from what I have read, I mean, of all that happened, and I was a child when the Biafra War took place. I think that from both sides there were errors and there were mistakes and there were steps taken by both sides that hurt the feelings and the relationship between ethnic groups, you know, in Nigeria. Nigeria is not made up of just 3 tribes. It's made up of a huge number, over 250 or 280
Absolutely.
tribes. So it's a huge challenge for any government. But it is a willingness to say, look, we need to sit down and build a nation out of these multi-ethnic nationality groups.
And we're going to talk more about tribal divisions after this short break. But both of you, for the moment, thank you very much indeed
Thank you
for
very
that.
much, Louis.
You're watching Insight. Coming up, a look back at the legacy of Africa's civil wars. Stay with us.